Jemele Hill is a well-known journalist, author, and media personality. She's celebrated for her outspoken commentary on sports, politics, and social issues, particularly issues of race, gender, and equality. She gained prominence during her time at ESPN, where she co-hosted SportsCenter and contributed to The Undefeated. Since leaving ESPN, she's continued to build her platform with projects like her podcast, Jemele Hill is Unbothered, and her memoir, Uphill, which details her personal journey and perspectives on navigating a career in media while advocating for social justice. She's also been active in broader cultural and political conversations, often using her voice to call out injustice and uplift marginalized communities. And she is our guest today. Welcome to Civic Cipher as we podcast on location here in Los Angeles, California. I am your host, Ramses Ja.
I am Q Ward. And wow, we are broadcasting from Los Angeles, California.
Indeed we are.
In the presence of someone I consider royalty, and I don't mean that hyperbolically, I mean that literally. I was lucky enough to get a copy of Uphill and to see that journey from a purview of somebody that grew up where you grew up, you know, almost literally in the same hallways where we went to high school, and knowing the journey. For some, it might look like, because you landed on your feet, that you had this master plan, that you had it all figured out. Ramses and I have a similar story. You know, we were radio DJs on a hip hop station in Phoenix, Arizona. You know, we giving away Migos tickets, playing Cardi B, having a good time. And then something happened where we had to use our voices to speak up for our people, and it put us in the crosshairs. I like to tell people I got us called to the office because of my big mouth. I couldn't stay quiet about what we were seeing going on outside. You know, people protesting in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and the news called us, you know, vandals and said we were terrorizing the city. But we were at protests with our kids. I had my 2-year-old. He had his, I think, 6-year-old at the time, or 5. And we knew that wasn't true. And as you know, the bullhorn only goes so far. It only reaches so many people. And Ramses was like, man, we have to do more. We can't just show up for the protest. We got this large platform. We got to say something. And, you know, eventually that led to the station just flatly telling us, you know, we don't want to do a black show on the hip hop station. And we were the only black on-air personalities in the entire state of Arizona. So being told by the hip hop station they didn't want to do black, Ramses quit for both of us. And then called me on the phone and told me, hey, we quit. In the position that you've been in throughout your career, you know, you have to be responsible with your advocacy because you have a living to make. You got bills to pay. How do you balance showing up for us, you know, navigating like objectivity and advocacy as a journalist? How do you navigate that space?
Well, for one, and first of all, thank you both for having me on the show. Really appreciate speaking to you all, and of course, you know, any opportunity I get to fellowship with somebody else from Detroit, especially from Mumford.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's always very important and special to me. But much like you guys knew when that moment came, the moment chose you, and you were just ready for it, right? And so I think it's been the same for me, is that there are a lot of concessions that we have to make. And especially if you're black in a media space, really in any corporate space, there's going to be concessions that you make. But you can't let the place you're at or the job you're doing change the integrity and the fabric and the DNA of who you actually are. And I told people this about ESPN when I got there in 2006, and told them throughout my time there for 12 years, is that you should go into any place. You have to know who you are. The place can't make you, because if that's the case, you're going to see a lot of inconsistency in how you behave and how you treat the platform that you're given. So for me, when those moments came where I felt like my voice or more emphasis was required, that moment kind of chose me, and I sort of knew like, yeah, this is the right thing to do. And you also know that you're okay with the consequences of how it turns out. You know, you all made a courageous choice to quit rather than subject yourself to clearly a situation that did not value you and did not understand the power and the the need for your voice, especially during a time like that. And I think when we run into those situations, we just innately know no more. We have got to draw a line in the sand right here. And the great thing about the way my career trajectory has gone is that I've had much more authority, empowerment, and leverage in this stage of my career. And I use those and weaponize those as I feel like I should for the betterment and the empowerment of us. You know, because it's not just really about me anymore, because I've been able to do some really amazing things in my career. And while, yes, there are plenty of other things I'd love to accomplish, but those really take a back seat to this general principle this business needs to be better for us than what it was for me. And listen, the OGs that took a lot of, abuse and had to deal with a lot of stuff, they did it so that my walk was a little easier. And I think that's the way we should all approach this business. We got to make the generation coming after us, or younger journalists, younger media folks, like, we got to make that path a little easier for them. And so that's kind of more my mission these days than anything.
Now, I want to ask something of you. I vaguely remember when everything went down with ESPN, but famously on our show, our listeners know, on the Black Information Network, our listeners know there. Q certainly knows this. I'm more of a music guy than a sports guy, And, I don't watch a lot of sports shows. I don't watch a lot of sports games. I don't know the names that you guys were talking about earlier. I like the fact that you guys are so excited about it, but I don't, I just bask in the energy, right? And there may be some people out there who are kind of like me. Now, I know, because I was aware when this happened, that it's quite a compelling story. But would you do our listeners a favor and kind of fill in just a Cliff's Notes version of actually what happened to you and that critical moment, going from, working to having to stand on business, as Q put it?
So I got to ESPN in 2006, and it was the longest job I ever had. It's the best job that I ever had. And so I sort of made my way up the ranks, if you will. And I started doing daily television, had my own show starting in 2013. It was called Numbers Never Lie. Then they changed the name of it to His and Hers. Me and my television partner and friend, Michael Smith, we were co-hosts. And then in 2016, we got a pretty big promotion. They asked us to host the 6 p.m. Sports Center, which is a legacy job in the business. It's a great job, hosting Sports Center. For those in sports media and even those who are fans, they understand the importance of that. The Sports Center brand is ESPN's baby. It's its legacy. And being able to host that was a tremendous opportunity for us. And in 2017, as you know, President Trump was in office then, and this was right after Charlottesville. And we saw, to refresh some people's mind, in Charlottesville, we literally had Nazis marching on an American city saying the Jews will not replace us, all sorts of just hideous chants and staking their claim. And Trump, who was president at the time, he held a news conference. He was asked about this because while racism has never died, he certainly awakened the bolder aspects of it with some of his language, with some of his demeanor, and frankly with the things and the people that support him. And so, he held a press conference about it, and he was asked about, what his thoughts were on it. And he said there were very fine people on both sides who, there wasn't very fine people on both sides. There was Nazis on one side and everybody else trying to stop them on the other side. Okay. And he tried to make a false equivalence between the two. You had a young lady, a young white woman, Heather Heyer. She lost her life because a Nazi plowed into a crowd of people with their car because they were the counter protesters to this very awful moment in our history. And so the thing about when you do sports, and especially at a place like ESPN, when you see these things happening around the world, you're limited in the way that you can talk about them because your job is to, frankly, entertain people. People love sports. A lot of people look to sports as something that distracts them, or at least takes their mind off the real day-to-day life issues of their own lives and what we're experiencing as citizens. And, hearing that defense was just sickening to me. And on social media, it was somebody who tried to defend what he said. And I was in a back and forth with this person, which sometimes never.
We've been there.
Yes.
We've been there.
And it sometimes
We try to avoid it.
We try to avoid it, but sometimes today ain't the day and I ain't the one. So that was one of those days.
Nor am I the two.
Nor am I the two. I'm not the one or the two or one of your little friends. Any of those three, right? And so in this back and forth, I gave my honest assessment of the then president, our now about to be our president-elect as of this recording. And I just said, like, he's a white supremacist and he surrounded himself with a lot of other white supremacists and he is unfit to lead this country, period. And that's what I said. And honestly, people always ask me like, oh, wow, did you know that it would create such an international firestorm? I was like, nah, because I thought we knew. I thought y'all could tell.
We knew. I thought that was obvious.
I thought it was pretty obvious. I didn't, it's one of the most unoriginal things I've ever said because I thought it was just that obvious. Sure. But when you're anchoring the 6 p.m. Sports Center, which is the evening news of sports, much like you saw the evening news on CBS or NBC, when you're in that position, that's not where they expect that kind of realism to come from, especially about politics. And lo and behold, my comment got blown up everywhere. Of course, it was all over Fox, naturally, Fox News. And then it just kind of took on a life of its own. ESPN, they decided that they would put out a statement saying that, hey, that's how she feel. That's not how all of us feel. Or, trying to make the separation between those are her political views. They ain't got nothing to do with us. Right. And I thought putting out that statement was a mistake because you're going to take it off of Fox News and the conservative echo chamber and it's going to be on CNN now because you've legitimized the criticism by saying like, oh yeah, we know what she said was probably not right, but that ain't us. That's exactly what happened. And next thing I know, I go into work because, I tweeted this when I wasn't at work yet. And I go into work and I have friends who cover politics, and a couple of them were texting me from the White House press briefing room because the press secretary at the time, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's now the governor of Arkansas, she said she thought I should be fired for that. And it takes on another life of its own. Then next thing you know, Donald Trump is tweeting about me saying I'm dragging the ratings down at ESPN and I need to apologize for what I said. And so what was to me a meaningless reply suddenly is an international news story. And I'm being talked about on CNN and MSNBC and local news and national news, and all these stories are being written. So it is a firestorm. And really, the thing that was also obvious is that for as many people who may have supported Donald Trump, there was a whole lot of people who did not. And much to my surprise, a lot of athletes, many of whom I did not know personally, began to speak up on my behalf. Good. Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Colin Kaepernick, who I did know, like a lot of entertainers, celebrities, like the black folks mounted up basically. All right, good. And Voltron. I think, yes, we formed a Voltron, and I say this often, and it's true. It's like I credit that for, I don't know how close I was to just being fired, but I credit them speaking up on my behalf for the reason, at least ESPN, if they were thinking of that, they said, I don't know if we want this, right. And so, it was a very eye-opening time for me. And eventually, that happens. And I think in ESPN's mind, they were just like, you kind of need to chill out and lay low. Because, it was so much of a firestorm that like I couldn't open like Twitter or anything because I was just bombarded with people just, I had to they had to shut down my voicemail at work because people were leaving death threats. It was just crazy, and I had to have security at some point. Like it was wild. And then fast forward, maybe a couple weeks after this all happens and ESPN decides, they weren't going to suspend me. They weren't going to do anything because frankly, they didn't know what to do. The Dallas Cowboys, it was after Trump had called the NFL players sons of, because they were kneeling in protest, really this was about Colin Kaepernick, him deciding to take a knee to protest and bring awareness to racial oppression, police brutality, things we should all agree are bad. Him doing that had a rub-off effect on the other players. So the other players started to do the same thing. And Trump saw this. It was a political opportunity for him. So he goes off and calls them sons of bitches, all this kind of stuff. And the NFL takes a quote-unquote stand. But then Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, says that if any of his players, Jerry Jones, who donated a lot of money to Trump's campaign, who is friends with Donald Trump, says that if any of his players took a knee, he would cut them. Now, this is the same dude, okay?
Yeah. Oh,
Jerry Jones, same dude who gave Greg Hardy a job. Greg Hardy, who was once convicted of domestic violence for choking out his girlfriend in the bathtub, right? That same dude was more than okay with giving Greg Hardy another chance after an 11-game suspension from the NFL for some very serious domestic violence charges. But for him, the line is, if you kneel on behalf of humanity, then you're not worthy of being a Cowboy. And I thought that was crazy. And a lot of people, because the thing is in our discourse, when we're talking about sports or anything, there's one set of people whose opinions get elevated and they become sort of the default, like, oh, well, we have to adhere to this opinion. And then there's a whole lot of people who feel opposite, there's a lot of black NFL fans, a lot of black Cowboy fans, and they were outraged that Jerry Jones said this. And they were crushing the Cowboys players about it, like Dak Prescott and all these guys. And they were just like, I can't believe you guys would play for somebody who said this about you. Where's your sense of dignity? Where's your sense of respect? How dare you let this white man talk to you like that? There was a lot of that. And I was like, listen, last I checked, because, these players, and this is not to absolve them, and I get that when you're in that position, you made a lot of money, you have the comfort of speaking up in a way others do not. But at the same time, you can't ask the players to constantly risk it all when all you got to do is turn your remote to another channel. Ain't nobody putting a gun in your head telling you to watch the Cowboys or the NFL. Like, nobody. So what I said on Twitter was that if you all feel this strongly about what he said, then you need to make a stand with your wallet. Stop watching the NFL then, or stop watching the Cowboys. They all got advertisers. Stop patronizing them. Like, why are the players the ones that have to risk it all? And y'all can sit there in the comfort of your home and risk nothing, right? That was what I said. Mm-hmm. I was like, you go after the advertisers, there you go. In the history of boycotts, that's usually what works. That's all I said. Next thing I know, big Fox News headlines. Big headlines everywhere.
They had you on their radar already, though.
Man, they did. Because at this point, if I would have just said, hey, I like to tie my shoe, that would have been a news story. Right. It doesn't matter. And so big headlines, Jemele Hill, ESPN's Jemele Hill calls for boycott of the NFL. And I was like, oh, God, the NFL and ESPN are business partners, sure, right? Yeah. They have a billion on billions deal for Monday Night Football. And now, ESPN's getting a Super Bowl in a couple of years. So they have financially a lot at stake. And so you have now one of your most prominent personalities saying, hey, y'all need to just stop fooling with this league if you feel like that. Needless to say, my bosses were quite unhappy, very unhappy. Sure. And this time around, they considered that another violation of their very nebulous social media policy. And I was suspended. And I was suspended for 2 weeks. And it was that firestorm that started to kind of die down came roaring right back to life. And it was then in that moment that I knew. But I knew before I got suspended. Honestly, and people thought I was crazy for saying this. I really wasn't tripping about the suspension. I've been in this business long enough to know that when you start messing with the church's money, it's going to be a price to pay.
That's a
it's
fact.
okay. I'm all right with paying that price. Yeah. I'm fine with it. They did what they had to do. I did what I had to do. Mm-hmm. It's just that simple. However, the part that really bothered me throughout this whole ordeal, which lasts, together with between these two incidents, we're talking about a month, is that I came up with the type of journalism background. I worked in newspapers for a decade before I got to ESPN. And there was just this understood code that you never let City Hall come after your reporters. You stand up for them, you fight for them, the whole way this democracy works is because of a free press. We have the right to criticize the government. That is what that is. So for all the people who always want to holler freedom of speech, that's what that is protecting you from, retaliation from the government. Right. And so it's not about, people wrongly think that free speech means I can just say anything to you. You can't do nothing. No, it's protecting you from government retaliation. That is the difference.
Consequences of what you say, stupid.
Correct. Exactly. So you run up on the wrong one and you get popped in the mouth.
Right
well,
one.
that's on you. Or the right one.
On the wrong one or the right one.
Or the right one. The wrong one or the right one. So at any rate, when Donald Trump came after me and ESPN didn't do anything, that to me is when I knew our relationship was over. Yeah. And I said to myself, I was thinking like, where the way I was brought up in this business, you don't do that. Okay, you got to say something, even if and it was disheartening because being at a place that long, of course, you build relationships. It becomes personal to you, even though it's a transactional relationship. I provide talent to you, you put me on air. That's the way it works. And but it did give me some sense of relief, I guess, because I met with the president of ESPN the day before I was coming off suspension, and he apologized to me. John Skipper, he apologized to me for not speaking up and at the very least defending me against Donald Trump. But even still, when that happens, I was like, I don't think this relationship is gonna make it. I did a lot of great stuff at ESPN. Plus, on top of that, and this is not a small thing, I also did not enjoy doing SportsCenter. It was a constant fight, like those battles that I know you all fought in the position you were in Arizona, same ones, and I got tired of fighting to be me every day. Got really tired of that on SportsCenter. And because that's a different thing than when we hosted our previous shows where we had a lot of creative control. We could be who we were. SportsCenter, as my co-host used to famously say, a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but nobody know how to make a meal. And that is what we had. And once the political blowback came, it put the show in a compromising position because suddenly, we have right-wing and conservative think tanks or think pieces on us. And it's like the show, the success of it moving forward with me in particular just didn't seem great. Yeah. And I wasn't enjoying being on there. I don't think they were enjoying me being on there because this is their biggest property. And here we have all this smoke we got to deal with every time she says anything. And in my contract, I had the equivalent of a no trade clause where I had to do SportsCenter, and the only way I could not do SportsCenter is if I asked to not do SportsCenter. And I was just 1 year into a 4-year deal, was not enjoying it. And so I asked them if I could leave SportsCenter. I didn't ask to leave the company. That was a few months away. I was like, I want to leave SportsCenter because however much time that I have left here at ESPN, I don't want to be doing that. And as they told me flat out, typically we don't pay people the kind of money we're paying you to do what you want to transition into, but we'll do it. And I know they were going to do it because they had just as much vested interest in me being off SportsCenter as I did. We were aligned. And, so I went back to writing for The Undefeated, which has now since become Anscape. Writing is always my first love. And I went to doing different shows, Highly Questionable and Around the Horn, and just really kind of picking my spot. Sports Nation when that was still going. And then I got to about this is July of 2018, and I'm like, I don't have anything else I want to do here. Like I'm kind of done. And again, I'm just 1 year into a 2-year deal, or to a 4-year deal, excuse me. And I met with the president and his second in command, the president of ESPN, who was a different president by that time. And, I was just like, I think we both have a vested interest in me leaving. I don't really want to be here. I don't think y'all want to be here. I'm fine to be the first one to say we broke up. It's okay. Like, we had a good run. A lot of people don't last that long at any job. So to be there at a network like that for 12 years. So I left. And it was great for me because for the first time in a really long time, it made me reassess what I wanted to do with my career. It made me think about what this third act is going to look like. And frankly, it got me out of a little bit of complacency. Like when you wind up at a place like ESPN, like people are in those jobs forever. Like they don't leave them, you know. But if you have other things that you want to do, it kind of winds up stunting that a little bit, because you're making good money, you're on TV, you know, you could just hit cruise control and you're good. You're still working hard, but finding the thing that that you want to do that kind of scares you a little harder to do when you're in the comforts of a studio.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense.
And making a lot of money. So there's a very long-winded answer of what happened with me at ESPN.
I just want to add something right here. I appreciate that, because when we were in a position to have this conversation, when your name first came up, I had not made that connection yet. I know that story. Well, I knew the Cliff's Notes version of that story, but I knew of the story. I just didn't know that because you're an activist to me.
Which is crazy, because I would never describe myself that way at all.
But this is why I wanted to make sure I said this before you take the next question or the next round cue. To me, that's what you are. And I knew that you kind of came from, you know, the ESPN or Sports World or whatever, Sports Center. And, you know, that was just kind of a part of the story maybe, but it just kind of exists in sort of the mental sort of fog or whatever. But every time I see the name Jemele Hill, it's on some activist stuff. So that's the stuff that I share on my stories, or the stuff that, you know, gets retweeted, or the stuff that we use as source material for our program. And so when I finally did make the connection to the actual story, I was like, oh my God, that's who we're going to talk to. So that we had a whole, this was weeks ago, but we had a whole thing. So when we say it's an honor to sit and talk with you, I really do mean that, because to me, you come from a, you know, when Q was saying that we're sitting in the presence of royalty, and he said it before, I don't want to speak for you, but he's like, you know, she doesn't even know how much of a hero she is of mine. You know what I mean? And so I'm like, yeah, right? Isn't that crazy? so anyway, yeah, go ahead, Q. I just want to make sure I got that in there.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
that was more than I deserve.
It's an interesting world when being yourself becomes provocative, and you say benign things like the white supremacist guy is a white supremacist.
It's like, what
and
are you
it's
talking about?
And it's a headline that has to be confusing.
No, but it does let you know something that I don't think most people, and not even us as Black people, that we realize that our very existence is political.
Yes,
it's political. And because our existence and our humanity has always been a question. So that's why it's like innately, you know, we show up somewhere, we can say nothing, it comes out of our mouth, and there's going to be some people in the room who are wary or trying to figure out how we got in there or what's happening.
What are you doing here?
What are you doing here? It's like we always have to defend our right to exist constantly. And so because of that, we may not ever even voice a political opinion, but people just inherently consider us political.
Yeah. So you mentioned Colin Kaepernick. You guys got a chance to work together, right?
We did.
Tell me a little bit about that.
So ESPN, funny how things come full circle. So Spike Lee is directing Colin's documentary that goes through the entire bones of his protests, why things that happen behind the scenes that people don't know about that are very compelling. It's a phenomenal story. And then not just about the protests, but also his early life, like a bunch of different stuff. But so Colin, to give you an idea of the kind of person that he is, he's one of the most principled people I've ever met. And Colin and I knew each other loosely, very casually. I'm a 49ers fan, despite being from Detroit. It's not a terribly interesting story.
And we'll talk to her about that later.
Yes, yeah, we'll get to that maybe at some point. But so obviously, you know, he was once my quarterback. And I came to at first know him that way. And then at a couple of social functions, you know, we talked time by, you know, real cool. And of course, you know, when I was going through my drama with Donald Trump, he went through his drama with Donald Trump. So, and when he was protesting, I was obviously on air at ESPN, and I always defended his right to protest and the way that he did it, and calling out the people who were trying to hijack what he was talking about and make it about patriotism when it was never about that. So we sort of had this little history of like sticking up for each other and not knowing each other. And one day, this was a couple years ago, he called me and he said, hey, listen, I just wanted to talk to you because, you know, he had some offers on the table, people who wanted, you know, his documentary. And, you know, he let me know who that was. And he's like, you know, ESPN's one of them. And I don't want to do anything that would undermine your mission or seem like I'm in opposition to the things you stood for against them. He's basically like, you know, I don't want to, ESPN can basically be off the table for me because of what you went through. And I was like, wow, we don't even know each other like that.
That is
powerful,
like, man.
Right, it was. And I was so floored by this. And I was like, Colin, if you would have never made this phone call to me and I wake up and read in the trades that ESPN is doing your doc, I would still watch it and support it. Like, it would have never, my personal drama with ESPN has nothing to do with you. But I appreciate you being willing to stand in solidarity, which let me know, yo, this dude is for real. Like, he's a real dude.
Wow.
And so we get to talking, and I said, listen, I went through a very specific situation with them. Of the 12 years I was there, 11 or so were good. We went through a very rough last year, and I still left there with more friends than enemies and more people who liked and respected me than not. And including a lot of people, you know, kind of at the top. So I was like, it's fine. We're in an okay place. Are things awkward to some degree? Yes, but we're fine. And I was like, evaluating all the offers that you have based off the information you've told me, ESPN's the best platform. It's like they have, you know, they wanted to make it part of his 30 for 30 collection, which we know, I mean, they won an Oscar for it with the OJ Made in America. So they have a very definitive, excellent history with being able to do projects like yours. And, you know, frankly, I was a little surprised that ESPN was interested, not because it wasn't a good story, but mostly because, you know, this was a very polarizing issue for a lot of people. And, you know, ESPN had been under attack for being too liberal and too political and all this other stuff. So I was kind of surprised they were willing to kind of stand in the pain and do something like this, because eventually part of his story is the NFL's behavior and terms of exiling him from the league. So you have to call them out, and part of it, and that's your $1 billion business partner. Yeah. So I was a little surprised, and I was like, I think they're the best deal. And he appreciated my input, my insight. And I also added that, like, plus your presence there for a lot of the Black people who work there, like, your presence will be very uplifting. It will be very inspiring. And, you know, I think that's going to have like a real trickle down and rub off effect on everybody else, just knowing that Colin Kaepernick has decided to be in partnership with ESPN. So he was like, great, appreciate it. Then maybe 30 minutes later, he calls me back. He said, you know what? I think you're right about ESPN, but I tell you what would really make me feel good about this. He's like, you have to be my executive producer. I was like, don't threaten me with a good time.
Hey. Wow.
Yes. The answer is yes. I had talked to my agent, anybody. I was like, yes, I will do it. I don't even know if there's any money involved. Yes, I will do this.
Yes, indeed.
And so, and he hadn't even picked a director yet. So he hadn't picked Spike yet. And, you know, that came along as part of the process. And, you know, we started filming and just being able to work with Colin and to really see who he is. There's a lot of people, so many people that owe him an apology. And getting to know not just him, but his wife, Nessa, like they're
married.
Yeah, yeah.
Nessa's a friend of ours.
Nessa is, okay, yeah.
She's from Arizona. Or she spent some time in Arizona.
Okay, yeah.
From the Bay.
Yeah, him and Nessa are married. I don't think I let the cat out the bag there because it's been on social media.
Okay,
they posted it because they have a beautiful daughter too as well.
Congrats, Nessa.
But they're just really amazing people, and it's been my honor to play a role in telling a story that so many people got wrong, and so I'm just excited for people to see it. As for when, I know this is probably gonna be a next question. It's like we're still figuring that part out, but it's done. Okay. So that's a good thing. It's done, but we're still figuring out exactly when. And so I'm excited about everybody else seeing it, and so they can understand just how egregious it was what the NFL did to him.
So this interesting thing happens in the wake of something like that. You know, it's now author, executive producer, director, host, talent, scholar, Jemele Hill, right? And when you get to this point where you realize I'm no longer happy in this place where I've always been, in your case, you landed on your feet. You made a decision that was best for you, and now, in the eyes of us that follow you, you're thriving. You know, we're looking at Above the Fold. We're looking at politics. We're looking at executive producing this documentary for Colin Kaepernick. In the moment when you made that decision, was it peaceful? Were you like, I'm out of there? Or were you like, oh my God, what's next?
No, it was very peaceful because I felt like it was time. I was like, it's just time. You know, like everything that I was supposed to do at ESPN, I did. And a lot of things I never even saw coming. Never saw hosting SportsCenter coming. Yeah. Never saw, frankly, I mean, I went there as a writer because they hired me to be a columnist for ESPN.com. So I had no intention of having a television career. That just is something that just kind of happened. And so I was grateful for the experience for a lot of reasons, but mainly I came in as a good journalist. I left as a great journalist. Like it really, in part because the great thing you get to do at ESPN is like you get to do a lot of things. So I started podcasting there, did radio there, television, long form journalism, like every type of thing I did while I was there. And that gives you an incredible amount of knowledge, an incredible knowledge base as you go out into the non-ESPN world. Yeah. So that made my skills very transferable to do other things. And, you know, I wanted to get back to writing, so I was able to strike this beautiful relationship with The Atlantic, who I still write for, covering the intersection between sports, race, culture, and gender. And I could write about it at The Atlantic in a way that was different than how I wrote about things at ESPN, because The Atlantic is not in partnership with any professional sports leagues. And they're also a political magazine. So you know exactly what you're getting if you decide to read it. Like, I don't have to hear about stick to sports because politics is what they do, right? And they were still very much invested and serious about journalism. And that's getting harder and harder to find. And when it came to, you know, doing television, I was able to be a lot choosier about what I decided to do. I had the show with my good friend Carrie Champion on Vice. We did that for a while. We were supposed to have a show on CNN Plus. That went a little bit differently. That was above our pay grade. That was a whole merger happening that, you know, I often joke that's the best job I ever had because I got paid for a year to do nothing. And so can't complain about that. And then, of course, writing, you know, my memoir. So I was able to fulfill all these other things that were always in the back of my mind, but I was able to prioritize because I wasn't at ESPN. And then just the ability to be able to speak a little more freely, to be more involved in certain things. I think that was, I got tired of also having to, you know, everything I asked to do turn into some colossal email chain that just like, I was so happy to be rid of all that. You know, these days, if I'm presented with a project or an idea or, you know, an opportunity, do I want to do it or not? That's the end of it. Like, there's no email chain. It's like, do I like this? Okay, I do. Cool. I'm gonna do it. End of story. As opposed to being there when it's like, well, we got to get this person to sign off and this person. I do not miss that at all. And then I think it made me reimagine what storytelling is. I thought about it purely journalistically because that's my background. That's where I come from. But as I see now, especially being in Los Angeles, it translates into being an executive producer for a documentary, or like I was a producer for Simone Biles' docuseries, which is now on Netflix.
Make sure y'all check that out.
Yeah, definitely. It's I'm not just saying that because I'm a producer, but it's very good. And having some other production projects of mine go forward, and I started to understand like, oh, it's all storytelling. It's just the only thing that's changing is the method. So that's it. So, but you know, make no mistake about it that even though I have autonomy and freedom, I can live where I want to live finally. got married, all these great things that happened, it's still a grind. I mean, it's still a hustle. It's just a different kind of hustle. I often joke that I traded one job for 52 jobs. Right?
I know that's right.
It's like you're still, I feel like some days a bit of a mercenary because it's like, okay, you want to hire me to do what? Okay, yeah, I like it. Sure, let's go. You know what I'm saying? So it's just, but you're just a little bit more in control of what you do. But, it is, the media business in general is hard. I mean, it's just hard. And so I'm thankful that I've been able to really turn this, into something. But there's certainly been days, especially with this strike that was going on out here, where I was like, what did I do?
Oh, yeah.
But those days are few and far between.
I know that autonomy is freeing like no other, being able to just make the decisions that you want to make. And before Ram just followed up with you, I said this really fast, and I don't want it to seem small. Politics and above the fold, those are new. So yes. A lot of our listeners will be hearing those terms for the first time. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So as you all see, I have a lot of experience in the sports and political space, sports, political, culture, gender space. So I thought in an election year, why not start a political podcast? Okay. So I have a podcast on iHeart, and it is sports and politics. And so I think looking at politics, cultural issues, social issues through the lens of sports is very helpful because sports is one of the few things we actually do together. We're a very segregated society by and large, but even though Ramsey is not in this in terms of the sports.
I used to play football when I was in high school, and then I got into music. But,
yeah,
but anyway, go ahead.
But music has the same. It has the same effect.
Absolutely.
It's like. It brings together people of different races, genders, socioeconomic backgrounds, regions, all that. If you all are Laker fans, you're all Laker fans. You're all Pistons fans. You're all, whatever. Same thing with musicians. You're all Michael Jackson fans, right? And so because of that lends itself to an opportunity to discuss the political world through the lens of sports. So as an example, in terms of one of my episodes, like a recent one I did was about the state of American basketball, which in a weird way is just kind of immigration, right?
Yeah.
So on opening night in the NBA, there was a record-tying 175 international players on NBA rosters.
Wow.
And representing, I believe it's something like 40-something countries. It might have been more countries than that. And the last 6 NBA MVPs have all been foreign players. And there has been a lot of conversation at the grassroots level and even reaching beyond all that about whether or not development of young basketball players in America, how it's falling behind. And a lot of people that are, really knee deep in the basketball world, coaches, whoever, they will say that they feel like the European system of development is much better now than it is in America. Mm-hmm. And I was caught it caught my eye when Gilbert Arenas, the former NBA player, when he said on his podcast, and Gilbert says a lot of wild stuff. This is kind of on brand for him, where he said if they want, the NBA ratings have not been good this season in particular. And so one of the things he said, and last year's final was like the finals was like one of the lowest rated finals they've ever had. He's like, if they want to see more people interested, they want the game to come back, so to speak, they need to kick out all the Europeans, right? Wow. And he wasn't joking. And and I made a joke like, sounds like Gilbert supports mass deportation.
Oh wow!
But the whole point though is that there is this sort of cultural divide that's happening with this. There's a lot of coaches who frankly think the AAU system is failing kids, these days. I mean, they've always said that about AAU, and frankly, I did consider a lot of the criticism before now to be about the fact that it doesn't allow college coaches to have as much control as they would like, because at the grassroots level, you have local folk that are having these teams that, with these star players, and they become access points. So no, the college coach can't just show up in the living room. It's like, you got to talk to somebody, you got to talk to somebody's uncle, you got to, there's a system there in place. A lot of college coaches don't like that. And so I understood it from that standpoint, kind of those earlier criticisms of AAU, but the criticisms now are different. This is about development. And what people are noticing is that at these tournaments, number one, they're quite expensive. And not just expensive for the people in them, they're expensive for the people going to them, where you're charging for parking, and it's like $50 to park. It's like, just crazy amounts of money being that you have to spend to do this. And then they're playing a lot of games. And because they're playing so many games, the winning isn't really important, because if you're playing 4 or 5 games a day, what do you care if you lose 1 or 2? Yeah. Right? And so and now that you have NIL money, name, image, and likeness money that you can make off just that, the money has corrupted the system to the point where the development is not the central idea. And so anyway, that's a way to merge sports and politics. And one of the people I talked to about this was Michelle Obama's brother, Craig Robinson, and also Lavelle Moton, who is the head coach of NC Central. So looking at issues through that lens, I think, it allows people to sort of critically think about it a little bit differently. The episode, as of this recording that's coming out this week, is about the conflict in the Middle East. Always the light stuff with me. And
always.
One of the featured guests is Ibtihaj Muhammad, who is the first woman to compete in an Olympics in a hijab, a black Muslim woman who's great. She medaled, and she has been very vocal about her support for Palestine, and it's cost her. And there's been a lot of examples of athletes who have expressed pro-Palestinian views, not, by the way, anti-Jewish views. I said pro-Palestinian, right? So just because what's happening to Palestinian people is an atrocity. Sure. And it has been very damaging to their careers. Yeah. And so I just wanted to have this conversation. Is like, why is this the topic? I mean, and as black people, we understand this. We know that for a lot of people, pro-black means anti-white.
Yes, indeed.
That's not what we're saying, right?
And they intentionally conflate that too.
And it feels like this is a byproduct of that. This is like sort of the same thing. Just questioning, is it a good idea that we send so much money over to Israel that is going towards bombing hospitals and schools? And is it an idea, just raising that question creates a lot of issues. And so, I'm hoping through the lens of sports, because I have 2 scholars that are on there. One is both of which are Jewish, who really give me some great insight into what is a 100-year-old problem, or 100-year-old conflict. And so, I'm hoping to use this podcast to do that. Now, Above the Fold is like sort of that's on True TV in the TNT Sports family. Comes on every Thursday, also streaming on Max. And that is more of a nod to sort of traditional journalism. The term above the fold is an old journalism term. When back when people physically got papers.
That's a newspaper term.
That's a newspaper term. When people physically read the newspaper, all the stories that are above the fold of the newspapers are considered the most important stories. Sure. Yeah. And so, it'll be a combination of my commentary. I guess if I had to do that in Hollywood, we do the elevator pitches where you have to tell it what something is like. So this is probably like Real Sports meets sports reporters, and a little bit of Jim Rome is burning. So
I want to add something right here, if I may, just because I think it's important for our listeners to kind of understand that there's even more to what you're saying when you talk about, and you mentioned it, you put it more succinctly, that people intentionally conflate pro-black with anti-white. There's another level that a lot of our listeners may not be aware of. What we do specifically, just so that you're aware, we kind of work in the allyship space. We target hip hop stations. We try to, because we feel like there's the most potential to reach folks who have a predisposition towards supporting black endeavors, right? Black people, black communities, black music. And, to your point about intentionally conflating it, that is one half of what we're working against, I would say the other half is that people intentionally demonize what we do or muddle the waters. And it occurred to me, this might have been 2 or 3 days ago, that so, you know, for a lot of what you were talking about with, you know, the media blowback from your original tweet, and then some of the other things you were talking about, you mentioned the Muslim woman with the hijab. You know, obviously we went through that same thing with that whole media moment, the White Lives Matter moment, the Kanye West stuff. So we understand that firsthand, exactly what that feels, how overwhelming that could be, the death threats, you know, people targeting my children, that sort of stuff. Like, it was bad. When we said Black Lives Matter, when we collectively, Black people in this country said Black Lives Matter, the answer back was a collective all lives matter, right? And that, I believe, to be a singularly, an issue that singularly happens to Black people, because a matter of months after that, there was a movement, which we supported and still support, which said, stop Asian hate. And to date, I haven't heard anyone say stop all hate as a response to that movement. And so in addition to people being like intentionally obtuse about Black people affirming their humanity and their right to exist and their right to pursue the American dream, or at least try to cultivate a relationship with this country that's a bit more equitable, you know, that pushback always felt a little bit like ick. And, you know, that brings me to where we are now. A lot of us have been dealing with the results of the election of Donald Trump. And we're all looking for answers, and we're all looking for a path forward. And what we hear a lot from the highest tier is, you know, keep fighting, and it's vague, and it's, you know, it's just kind of, and they're not saying nothing. I don't want to be unkind to people who are, their backs against the wall, they really don't have any more options with the Supreme Court, and as I famously say, a figure 4 leg lock. You know, but you know, as a person that I look to as, you know, like a hero tier activist, as a person that inspires me and inspires this program, maybe talk to us a bit about how that felt. Maybe there's some way that our listeners can relate to you, because we've shared our reaction initially, and then maybe if you can conceive of what the next blah might look like, perhaps. You know,
you know, it's interesting that you mentioned how you all operate in a space of allyship.
We try to, yeah.
You try to, because if there's going to be among the biggest differences that people are going to see over the next however long this term lasts, and I know people are like, it's 4 years. Are we sure?
Yeah,
we don't know.
Who knows?
We don't know that if we're taking the president-elect's words at face value. And that's what's going to be different about this time, is that Black people have collectively checked out in a way I don't think I've ever seen. Yeah. You know, we've always been known, as we should be, because there's so many reasons we shouldn't even be here right now. We are resilient as hell. We have gone through so much. And yes, there's definitely a sector of Black folks who are like, hey, we've been through a lot. This can't be the worst thing, right? And that's true. Clearly, historically, that is true. Mm-hmm. But the difference is, I think, because we saw other groups of people that we have collectively stood for fail in this moment and decide that it was more, proximity to whiteness was more important. That's what we checked out. We're like, oh, y'all got it.
Everybody feels that way.
Y'all got it.
Yeah.
What are we trying to make this umbrella movement work for? Y'all got it. And I know it wasn't everybody. Yeah. I know it wasn't the majority, but like just in talking, you know, just in group chats and talking with my friends, they really felt betrayed by seeing the number of Latino voters vote for Donald Trump.
That was
betrayed. And because it was the comedian and actor Hassan Minaj who told me this a couple years ago, and it always stuck with me. He said, listen, don't make any mistake about it. He said, all the rest of us that are now feeling empowered to speak about our rights and to go forward with any kind of movement building. We were just seed on the email that Black people wrote.
Talk to me.
And I
like him.
No, he broke it down, and he was just like, we just got CC'd. And it's true, because like when you go back and look at the Civil Rights Act, one of the main components of that act was immigration. Okay, that was one of the main components of when that got passed, because America had a very restrictive, targeted immigration policy where they did not want certain groups of people in this country. And Martin Luther King and all of them fought for that to be different. And so to see that in real time, like, hold up. So in this moment where we need a collective brother and sisterhood, y'all were like, you know what? We value the proximity to whiteness. Black people are not going to, I think Black people are going to be a lot more strategic and a lot more choosy about the things they decide to get involved with the next however long.
40 years.
I think it is. I think it caused, it created such a rift that I haven't really seen this before. And I understand where it comes from. So that's going to be a lot different.
Sure.
The allyship is not going to look the same. That moment in George Floyd, when all the protests were happening after his murder, where you did see a wide collection of people who were out there protesting. I don't know that we're going to see that for a long time. And I think Black people are going to be a lot more, they're going to be a lot more precious about who they allow into our movements.
Okay. And
so I see that as being a byproduct of it. And, it can be debatable whether that's good or bad. So that'll be one thing. And the other thing I think about this election, which I must say, I was not surprised by the outcome in the slightest. I actually predicted this would happen because the groups of people that it would require to frankly fight for a different direction for this country, I knew they were not going to show up. And the Latino vote, the numbers of it surprised me, but when people were saying that white women were going to show up and vote differently than they have, I was like, have y'all not looked at the voting trends the last 60 years? And so as people are doing these numerous autopsies trying to figure out where the Democrats went wrong, and they're not perfect by any means, and there were certainly campaign mistakes that were made. It's mistakes made in every campaign. It happens. But the thing is, when people want to bring up, they lost the working class voter. They lost this kind of voter. They don't appeal to this kind of voter anymore. How come that don't work with Black people? How come Black people are working class?
Yeah.
Black people live in rural communities.
Yeah.
Black people check all them boxes that they said they lost. And so how did they not lose us, but they lost everybody else? Yeah. That's what I'm trying to figure out, because it can't be that. To me, it is avoiding the obvious. There's a reason Donald Trump has beaten 2 women. And you want me to believe, this is the other thing I couldn't believe. It's like, you want me to believe that more white women gonna show up for Kamala Harris than Hillary Clinton, who is a white woman? I mean, like, they didn't, and more white women voted for Trump the second time. So I'm just like, no, they're not gonna show up, because as they have shown historically, white women, the eligible voting white women, who's who I'm talking about, that 55%, that 56%, that 57% that voted for Donald Trump, is like, the privilege of whiteness means more than gender. And that is the reality.
Jemele, I said that this morning.
Just that recently.
He says it on the show constantly.
Those that benefit from the misogynist, patriarchal, capitalist, white supremacist system are not just white men. So all those people that benefit from that system stand up and fight for it. Even immigrants, even Latino immigrants, correct, first generation who just got here, who may have just gotten naturalized. They're very, very proud to be American.
Correct.
And they now see themselves as a part of a system that they have to defend.
They do. And they, the one thing that everybody understands that comes to this country, even other Black people from different countries, is that they need to separate themselves as fast as possible from Black Americans. They all understand this. It is like, it's like they get a blueprint or a guidebook when they come here, and in the guidebook, there's a statute of liberty. Oh, by the way, you got to be anti-Black if you want to make it. It's in the pamphlet. It's like, so having interesting conversations with other Latinos. The interesting part to me is that the ones that, like, a lot of the ones that were born here, not everybody, certainly. So I'm speaking in sort of a rough generality, is that a lot of them don't speak Spanish, and that's by design. Because, as some of them have told me, is that, their abuelos, they did not want them to speak Spanish because they didn't want that to be something to be used against them. And that says a lot about how they perceive what it means to be American and who they think is American. And we've seen this happen historically. It's the reason why it's no longer Irish Americans, Italian Americans. And yes, we know we have enclaves in this country where there are Irish neighborhoods and Italian neighborhoods, but they traded in being separated for the whiteness. Right? And that this is what it is. It's like every group has gone through that. We're the only group that can't.
We cannot.
We can't do it.
A brief history lesson right here. I believe we shared this on the show, so I'll give the Cliffs Notes version. But the term black was created in, I believe, the 1500s, sometime around then. The term white was created around the 1500s to delineate the non-slave class from the slave class. And prior to that, to your point, there were Frenchmen and Irishmen and Scandinavian people and so forth, and they were separated by countries. But in order to, again, delineate the slave class, the term white came about. So that meant that you were not a slave, and black came about to suggest that you were a slave or at least a member of the slave class.
And that was intended to be into perpetuity.
Yeah,
right,
and that term,
exactly.
In the 1500s, think how long human beings have been around. That term originating in the 1500s still has ripple effects today. I think to your point, maybe Donald Trump doesn't stay president for 4 years. Maybe he dies tomorrow. I don't know. People can imagine all kinds of crazy stuff, right? Hope that's not crazy. But anyway, anything could happen, right? But the ripple effects, like the term white, the ripple effects of a Donald Trump presidency might echo into the lifetimes of our kids, grandkids.
I mean, we're still paying for things Ronald Reagan did.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're
Absolutely.
still, so yes, the legacies of presidents, you typically aren't able to assess it in the 4 or 8 years they're in office. You don't really see the damage of it
well after the fact.
Until well after the fact. I mean, I bring this up all the time with Ronald Reagan. He's the reason why college tuition is what it is.
Oh yeah.
Because they saw a liberal movement here in California they did not like. They thought it was breeding hippies and marijuana users and people who were anti-war. And oh, by the way, the people who were against the Vietnam War all turned out to be right. But they didn't like that. And so he pulled the funding from colleges, and that became the model that everybody else did. Like,
absolutely.
That's why education at every level is under attack.
Shout out to Reaganomics.
We know what Reaganomics.
We're here and we're used to it, so we can't even conceive of a time when college was affordable.
No, because college used to be basically free.
Yeah.
Like it didn't, in every state, and they wanted to change that because also one of his main advisors didn't like the fact that education actually bred more equality. They were trying to stop the accessibility to college because they only wanted a college system where only certain people could afford to go there.
They definitely didn't want a Jemele Hill to go to college.
No, they didn't want any of us to go.
They definitely didn't want
or
that.
to seek any kind of education. So it's like, yes, you still wind up paying for it. So we have to look at the fact that Donald Trump will likely get 2 more Supreme Court appointments. And there's going to be a whole lot more judges and all these other things. I mean, as it was, we're still trying to deal with the remnants of his first presidency, right? So a second one where I think he's probably more politically savvy. He's going to have more loyalists. We now have Elon Musk as the first lady. There will be, I don't claim that as an original thought. That was Stephen King.
That's incredible.
The author, he got banned from X for calling him the first lady.
That's incredible, man. Shout out to Stephen King.
Shout out to Stephen King. I was like, ever since he said that, I have been calling him the first lady. Because I mean, you put a billionaire oligarch in charge of slashing the government in America. I'm sorry. When did he grow up? Like what gives him the okay? Yeah. So
by the way, he's
an immigrant,
South Africa.
He's of all places,
an immigrant in charge.
Yes, an immigrant in charge
from apartheid South Africa.
From apartheid South Africa, exactly. Grew up steeped in that. And you could tell by his perspective that's the case. So I wish, for the love of God, black people, please stop buying that Cybertruck. Please
twice.
stop buying it. Fight it. Trust me, there's plenty of other boxy, ugly trucks you can get. It ain't got to be that one. All right. But so yeah, I think black people as a whole, I sense we're regrouping right now. Yeah. We're trying to figure out, because America has decided whether people want to really acknowledge this or not. They've already decided the type of country they want to be. Yeah. That one was on the ballot. That's been on the ballot the last 2 elections, really. And they made a decision. Okay. Since we all know the decision that was made, we're trying to figure out, as we often have, our best way to survive within their decisions.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And so I don't think we're going to necessarily give up the fight. But I think a lot of black folks feel real defeated right now and feel like they need to regroup, and frankly, to maybe focus more on our community and no one else's.
I don't want to keep you forever, but I also don't want this to be doom and gloom, but I brought up Uphill before. Reading that book was a journey. For people who haven't read that book, get it. Believe it or not, life for Jemele Hill was not silver spoons. And coming from where we come from, there's a unique thing about growing up in Detroit. We got to see black leadership, black political leadership, black police officers that were not violent to us, black teachers, like Detroit, very, very black for us. In our experience, especially in Northwest Detroit, in the hallways of Mumford High School, we also got to see black greatness. I bring up Uphill because, again, this was not silver spoons. You didn't have this laid out easy path. A black woman in this country and black women on this planet, Ramses and I, we might be famous for this because we say it every time a microphone is on. We spoke to the National Council of Negro Women. We said to thousands of women, reminding them the closest thing on this earth to God is the black woman. Oh. And we believe that to our bones. So your journey as a black woman, getting to where you've gotten in your career, would not be an easy climb for anyone. A white male-dominated industry where you have climbed to what many would say the pinnacle. And I'm not being hyperbolic. The 6 p.m. Sports Center, as she said, the flagship of sports media journalism, like that was it. Yeah. To get there took a lot. To now have forged your own media imprint, to now be the captain and curator of all that you do. You spoke about the free press. We talk about what we collectively do for a living. And again, I don't want to be doom and gloom, but in the wake of this election, can we still do our jobs? Can this industry that we thrive in and that we feed our families with, does it go away? Is it illegal for us to talk how we talk 2 months from now? Like, what is your thoughts on what this is going to look like for all of us after January 2025?
Those are very real and grave concerns, because part of the reason we're in this is because that journalism didn't do what it was supposed to do. And this is not just in regards to Trump, but it's just the fact that the whole mission of being a journalist is to be a disruptor. You're not supposed to go along with the system. You know, there's a phrase that I learned as a young journalist that remains true. Our job is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. That's the whole point, right? And so we're there to be the watchdogs, to provide the check of power, and seeing us in this moment already capitulating to what we're supposed to be examining, putting under scrutiny, discussing, telling people what's really going on. To see us capitulating to that is heartbreaking. I chose to be a journalist, even though I chose sports. I chose it for that reason. I mean, yes, it's about telling stories about athletes and winning and being inspired, but it's also about understanding how systems work. They don't work any differently in sports, you know? And so holding those systems accountable. And my fear is that because the president-elect has, in particular, singled out media as, his words, enemies of the state, that's going to make some of the platforms that some of us work for capitulate to the power. See, when you study the Nazi regime and you study how, because a lot of people ask this question when these regimes, these dictators rise up, like, What were the people doing? Like, why did they give in? Like, what happened? It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's not one failed blow. It's always little capitulations that happen that when you look up, you find that all the things you were worried and feared already happened. This is why voter apathy is so significant
And problematic, yeah.
and very problematic, just because the election that just happened, half of this country didn't vote.
Yeah.
So that's telling you
That's terrifying.
that
man.
it is very terrifying. So half of the people in this country don't find a reason to remain engaged in a system that affects everything they do. And so I blame the media for not being great at telling people what was at stake, not helping them understand what exactly it is we're supposed to be doing. And what I see already is media companies already switching up, already doing it, and they haven't even been asked to do it. And that is very frightening.
Not just media.
No, it's not just media. It's going to be everything. I mean, we've seen Walmart. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
so, which only, and I said this when the black squares in 2020 was here. I said this then. I said, you know, that's great. But now, and standing up for, standing against racial oppression and police brutality and standing up for black people actually doesn't matter in this moment. When it matters is when you have something to lose. See, if the whole world and the whole nation is agreeing that what happened to George Floyd was murder and it's bad, I'm glad we could agree on that. But there's no risk in saying I'm gonna Black Lives Matter 2020. It was a cuss word though in 2015 when it was Michael Brown, right? It was a cuss word then, and then fast forward, it was like, oh no, Black Lives Matter. You got the NFL commissioner saying it. You can't say that and still exile a player who stood up against the things that you claim you support now. That means your support is only going to go with what's trendy. Yeah. And so right now, black people ain't in. We're not trendy anymore. Supporting us, rather, is not trendy. So you see not just them, but a ton of different companies that all of a sudden announced that they were rolling back DEI initiatives, which means y'all didn't believe in it to begin with.
Thank you.
You didn't believe in it. You were just doing it cosmetically. You were just doing it because you wanted to look good. You were doing it for the press release and not for anything that mattered.
I think that's why, a part of the reason why this second election of Donald Trump was so hurtful, because the ripple effect of it exposes just how vulnerable we've been and just who our fair weather friends have been. And some people live in food deserts where the only place where they can get food is a Dollar Tree. And a lot of people live in environments where the only employer is a place like a Walmart. And then now that Trump effect, that the country chose him again, and it gives those fair weather friends license to roll back what it was that we thought was progress and what we thought was protections. How it feels to be a black person on the ground is fundamentally different forever because of that. And that's, I think,
no, that's the gut punch. Yeah. Is that, because the 2020 election, because that happened the same year of George Floyd, I think, and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, part of what was driving people, and the pandemic, what was driving people to the voting booth was wanting to make a statement against the things that created those situations. Mm-hmm. And it's just been 4 years. And we saw the rollbacks from what was promised in 2020 happen literally like not even 2 years later. They couldn't even stand in it that long.
That's
and
fair.
I was just like,
that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, and so all these companies that are suddenly, and they're part of it is that like they're being bullied into it, but part of it is an easy capitulation. Sure. For them. Like nobody was asking, I didn't even know Walmart had a DEI initiative.
Correct.
Right? Like no one knew, but they were just like, tell you what, before y'all come for us, we're getting rid of this. And of course the Walmart family, anybody does a little bit of research, they're big Trump supporters. Yeah. Right. So when they even started one, I was like, oh this is weird, but okay. Yeah, but what we will, find is that now, because even though it was the slimmest of margins, because Trump did win the popular vote by less, I think he won it by the lowest margin in history. It was like less than 2%. He won the popular vote. But they're leaning into that and saying that this is a mandate, that America wants to be more in the image of what he is.
America chose not to vote. That's what happened.
That's what happened. America chose not to vote, and America chose to dig in further into the patriarchy, misogyny, and racism.
That's fair.
So America, basically.
America.
And so that is going to impact what we do, because suddenly, unless you have people who are willing to stomach this kind of fight, we're going to see a lot of people lay down before they even been asked to. And that is scary. That is how authoritarianism happens.
Well, you know what? I will say this, just because, Q's right. We've taken more time than we deserve from you. We, on this show, on this program, we do believe in allies and those who have chosen to stay. We make this show for you. Collectively, we're all we have, and whatever path forward, it's going to require all of us on it in agreement. I don't ever want to be a part of anything that is even remotely divisive in terms of humanity's capacity to come together. And I know that Q feels the same way. I'll speak for him in this moment. And so we will never allow our intellectual property to be used in that way, nor our images, nor our voices, or anything like that. So we're still here if you're still here. And if you're listening, then that means that you're still here. I will say that whatever path forward, it's going to take voices like yours, Jemele. We hope that we are making a difference with what we're doing, being on 170 radio stations.
That's right. You better say that.
It helps us feel like we are doing something special. But, as you mentioned, that could change.
Yeah. But it's more critical now that you do it now.
Yeah, this is what we've been hearing.
And
thank you for saying that, Jay, because it doesn't always feel. We felt a little hopeless, right? You know, after the election results, it was like are we making a difference?
What did we do that for 4 years?
And again, the conversation that led us to having this conversation with you was a communication from somebody at iHeart that said, hey, you guys seem to have some shared ideas. And I'm like, me and Jemele have more than just shared ideas.
Sure, yeah.
There's some history there. Mm-hmm. But, for iHeart extending to us more radio stations and a much larger platform now, at least someone over there heard what we were talking about and said more people need to hear it. So
shout out Chris Berry, shout out
important to say what's up to Tony Coles and Chris Berry and Chris Thompson. Yeah. And thank you guys for believing in us and kind of elevating and amplifying this messaging that we have.
Well, what I would like to do is, forge a relationship with you as
absolutely.
one of those voices that, we might turn to. You're a brilliant mind.
Call on me whenever.
Yeah,
yeah.
We'd love to have you back on the show.
Oh, I would love to be back. This has been great because sometimes, even though in this moment where we're all just trying to regroup, it feels better to do it together.
Yeah,
yes, indeed.
It feels better to do it together. So this has been good for me as well.
That's some therapy today.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. We could do that. We could do that. But if it's meaningful, I know that you kind of move in a different set of circles, and there's some very powerful people in your corner, but we'd like to be counted among the people that are willing to amplify any messaging that you have that you need to get out there, not just pick your brain for our own sake, but just because we feel like, again, you're the activist woman to me. You might talk about, I don't know who up there is a basketball player on the sign. You might talk about basketball people, but I know you,
Well, I consider that to be a huge compliment.
Sure,
and the only reason why I'm reluctant to accept it is just because I have several of my friends who are on the ground activists.
Yeah,
and
well,
they
same.
are
Same.
remarkable people.
Well, before we go, we're DJs, and Q always gets mad if you say that. That's where we come from. We're radio personalities, as you mentioned. We was, stick around after these messages. We got your tickets coming up, and X, Y, and Z will do whoop. And now we're here firmly in this space, and there are people that know us from way back then, and they're like, man, it's so great to see how far you've come. And then there's people that have no idea. You're a DJ? And I'm all tattooed up and everything. Like, yeah, I'm a DJ. That's what I do. Give me a microphone and a party, man. I'll show you how to make it work. But
I love
anyway, so for whatever reason, we're all here, and we want to make sure that you feel like you have some supporters, and that we feel like we can come back to you and just kind of pick your brain, because you have a different vantage point and so forth. I'm from down the road there in Compton, so I'm not from Detroit. So you got to say a proper goodbye cue before we let her go.
Just to everybody that got a chance to hear this today, this conversation is a long time coming. Jemele and I, closer to family than associates professionally. My cousins, my friends from high school, our friends from high school, my friends from Michigan State. Like, it goes back from Aaron Hayton to Derek Mason to, I could be naming names all day. Shout out to Regina Bowie, who is the reason I know Jemele's name, and I'll tell you more about that story later. Okay. But author, producer, and to Ramses, activist.
Talk to me.
Host of the iHeart podcast, Politics, Above the Fold, in the TNT group. And I can't wait to see this Colin Kaepernick project. You got me really excited about that. We're very proud of you. And like Ramses said, you have not just some supporters here, but some brothers who will, stand up in front of you if we need to.
I appreciate
We like that.
Thank you. I know I'm dealing with some real ones. So thank you all for, this wonderful interview and this time spent together.
Right. Last thing before we go, I know that you're very popular, but do us a favor, let everybody know your social media, how they can.
Very simple. Jemele Hill, pretty much everywhere. So I'm on Blue Sky now for those who have made the transition. I'm still on Twitter, just a whole lot less. But yeah, Instagram Jemele Hill, Threads Jemele Hill. So yeah, you can catch me pretty much anywhere. I'm not hard to find.
And you can find me on all social media at Ramses Ja.
I am Q Ward on all social media as well.
And until next time, y'all.
Peace.